Hello. Okay, right, cool. So we live. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good night, good morning, whatever time it is in your area. And welcome to another, well, one of the first live streams that this channel has done. In a moment, I'll be joined by Sean and Aaron of Seriously Wrong. And we will be answering a multiplicity of questions that have been asked on the community posts, in the comments, and of course in the live chat. It might be a lot to keep up with because I'm not sure how many people are going to end up jumping on, but we will try to answer every question. And if we've missed your question, my apologies. Hopefully we can get to it at some point. I noticed there are already a lot of questions and stuff in the chat, and I see I already have a lot to catch up with. But before I get into all that, as I will be hosting some special guests, let's just introduce them one time. Folks, actually, I should probably call them before I introduce them. Okay, so let me just bring them on. Folks, this is Sean and Aaron of Seriously Wrong.
Hey, thanks for having us. This is Sean.
Yeah, I'm Aaron, and yeah, likewise. It's great to be here.
Glad to have you guys here. Everyone could hear both of them? Just want to get some confirmation from the chat before we continue.
Yeah, you just wait a moment for people to say yes or no.
Yeah. There tends to be a delay with these kind of things, so it's just a matter of keeping up with it. Cool. People are real asking questions fast, boy. Whoosh. Can't even breathe for 2 seconds. We'll get to everything. We'll try to get everything. I mean, if you ask kind of early, it's going to be lost, I think, in the chat. So hold on to those questions, and we'll try to get through them one at a time. I think we want to start off with, well, first of all, how are the both of you?
Doing well, yeah.
Yeah, doing pretty good. Yeah, we just, a project we've been working on for a long time ago just came out on Means TV, our cartoon show, Papa and Boy.
Can I tell them about it?
Oh, yeah, please do.
I finished watching it. And it is fantastic. It is so funny and entertaining, and it's really a unique approach to, I guess, discussing these kinds of ideas. Just the world building and the story. The show I'm referring to is Papa and Boy. It's a production of the Seriously Wrong podcast. For people who've been listening to our podcast for a while, you would know that Sean and Aaron have been talking about that for like a while now. As in having different skits with Papa and Boy in different settings. In fact, in the episode that I was in, we had a Papa and Boy segment. So I suppose Sean and Aaron could tell you guys a bit more about what that show is about and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for saying you liked it. That's awesome. And yeah, the first episode is on the Means TV YouTube channel. It's Papa and Boy. It's an absurd cartoon world that is entirely populated by papas and boys, where they live under a dystopian system called the Fatherson system, which is just like a metaphor for every kind of hierarchy you can think of in our current system. And it's just trying to jam in as many political ideas we can while also being as funny as possible in a short cartoon show type segment.
Yeah, we've been working on it for the last couple years. I had a small team of animators help me at the end, but the first episode on YouTube, I actually, apart from the backgrounds, animated myself, which was pretty unusual because animation takes a long time, but it was a real passion project. But yeah, I'm doing well because we're just hearing from people who are watching it right now, and like we worked on it for a long time, and you start like at a certain point, you're like, is this good? Like, is this? I can't watch this anymore. I've seen it so many times. But we're like, yeah, just at this point now, we're finally hearing back from people, so it feels kind of amazing. It was a big project, but we're really proud of it. And yeah, it's we've tried sending it to different groups of people, and I find that it's something that you can even share with people who are outside of like the left sphere, that they get the satire of it. So I was pretty stoked to find that out this week. I did a trial run to some people I know who are non-leftists, and they all liked it too. So that's why I'm doing good. I'm riding high off of that.
I'm glad to hear that all the hard work has been fruitful. So you guys want to just jump right into it?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, here we go. I mean, we have some questions that we collected from before. Would you like to do that, or would you like to start with anyone from the chat?
Yeah, maybe let's go with the stuff in the chat. I think there's a decent amount of overlap, and it's cool to answer the questions of people who are here right now. It seems to be a lot of them.
Okay, cool. Let's see. I'll just read the first question that comes up.
I want to say before. I was going to say, I want to compliment the video that you did, the library economy video. Is really, really great. Like, really, really killer video. Like, I was really blown away by it. Not just the parts that we were in, but the whole thing. I just wanted to mention that at the beginning. I forgot before.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm so glad that I was able to translate the ideas that you all have put out and like turn it into something that, you know, a lot more people have been able to latch on to. So it
was great.
I suppose the first question is, okay, a lot of general questions are being asked, but this isn't like a Q&A about me. I mean, we probably do that some other time. This is specifically about library economy. So someone asked, how many libraries would a librarian build if librarian could build libraries? Let's start with something fun.
I would say exactly as many as are needed to meet the needs of the people in the local area. Not too many and not too few libraries, just right.
But yeah, I would tend towards too many over too few if I had to pick between those two.
Slightly too many.
It's better to have too many libraries than not enough, we always say.
I agree. Another person asks, are there any books you can read that you could learn more about this?
Not specifically, right? Sort of. Like, there's a bunch of different... If you listen to our Library Socialism trilogy of podcasts, there's a lot of references and things that we mention that we're threading together. But there isn't a good, like, single Library Socialist tome. It was kind of a synthesis of the different ideas from different areas, but influential in that was Murray Bookchin, Buckminster Fuller, the pirate movement, the movement advocacy for internet piracy organizations. A number of things weighed into it.
Inventing the Future is a book that covers some of these ideas. I think there's a lot of these ideas sort of spread out through a lot of different leftist communities and leftist ideas, especially anarchist and social ecologist theory and those kind of areas. And stuff that touches on common property and finding ways to manage common property, I think is related. But in terms of something that's like, yeah, how do we build a library economy, or what does a library economy, library socialist economy look like in specific? I don't know if anyone's written a book like that yet.
Yeah, I'd invite people to participate in the creative project of thinking through these principles and how to apply them in different contexts, and to even participate in the process of writing things that may be books in the future. You're invited to think about this with us. There's principles. The laws of library science is covered in Andrew's video. It's a great heuristic to look at political problems, and there's the usufruct, irreducible minimum, and complementarity trio, which all have sort of ethical claims behind them. And using those two things, you can sort of find answers or principles. You can think through answers to questions in this sphere using those things. So I think it's still an ongoing process to invent what a library economy will look like in all detail. But we're also constantly hearing of stuff that fits into this field where there's an overlap with something we said in a book that someone read and they liked. And so yeah, it's everywhere. It's like we just need to sort of like bring it together, and it almost feels like discovering something sometimes. Like when we figured out the commonality between information sharing and like the positive sides of internet piracy, and the ecological positive impacts of having a sharing economy, a library style thing, the overlap between them, it kind of blew our minds when we did that first library socialism episode. We didn't think that we were I don't know. It felt like we were just going to do one episode of this little idea that we had, and it just expanded from there. Like we keep on finding stuff that it connects to. So, yeah. But if you reach out to us, we can point you in the direction of some type of reading or another, depending on what you're looking for. But yeah, it's a synthesis project.
Right, right. I agree. It absolutely is a synthesis project, and it is also a collaborative project. In a sense, as this is a very nascent idea, we got to keep in mind a lot of these questions, a lot of the ideas, a lot of the concerns are things that we have to work out and work through together. Like when I made the video on library economy, or when Sean and Aaron did their series on library socialism, that was not the beginning and end of the idea. You know what I mean? It's something that we are all trying to figure out the answers to. So, I mean, some of these questions we may not have an answer to. But I look forward to figuring those out as we go along.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes we can give an answer, or like maybe it would work like this. But a big part of all of this is going to be meeting the contingent needs of specific communities at specific times, given their specific ecological needs and like what resources are available. And there's a lot of contingencies, but like you can kind of think through example versions a lot of the time.
Yeah, we don't want to fall into the trap of making a blueprint that then the real world can't meet. And then there's sometimes when this happens, the people try to punish the world for not meeting their blueprints. And I'd just rather have much more, tenuous, ever-shifting blueprints, if any at all. Like, I don't want to punish the world into being what I think it should be. It's going to take a lot of work to figure this stuff out step by step and in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. On behalf of the one particular person in the chat who is asking, because they haven't seen the last video yet, unfortunately, do you mind summarizing in like a sentence or three what the library economy is?
I would say at the most basic level, it's an idea for books by sharing them and having a institutional system of sharing set up for those items. You can see how it allows more people to access goods using fewer resources and having to produce fewer of those items. So the most basic part of the proposal is expanding that out to everything, and to have a decommodified, commonly held economy that you don't have to have money to participate in. It's this sort of sharing system based on taking things out of the library when you need them and then returning them when you're done for other people to use.
Yeah, and it's having a society that's, instead of a society that's built on private property in the marketplace, it would be a society that the dominant institution that other institutions are made in the image of is, lending libraries. So instead of private property, usufructian property relations, which is, you have something as long as you're using it and then you return it, and that this is a set of principles that can be applied to the entirety of the economy and society. That's sort of the vision of library socialism: a world where no one falls below a certain irreducible minimum, where people's differences are celebrated as something that is generative and bigger than the sum of its parts. A world that's directly democratic and ecological, because that's the thing too about libraries is, if you have to produce less stuff to have more abundance to access, there's an ecological benefit, and the problem of these faces. And libraries has an answer that libraries give an example of a way that we can organize in a way that can address both those things at once, both preventing scarcity and the ecological crisis, or reducing the impact on the ecological crisis.
Right, right. That's a really good explanation. On the lighter side of things, someone has been asking how exactly we are still alive after that ship got sunk.
Uh, I don't know, like when we're kind of yelling, and I imagine we were in the process of drowning there at the end, or do they mean like in the podcast after the episode? For that, I have no answer. Maybe we were in heaven or a non-denominational afterlife of some kind.
I appreciate that explanation.
I'll pull aside the curtain here. It wasn't real, so we didn't die.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear I'm still alive. Someone has been asking, by the way, regarding the occasional cuts in the frame rates or in the audio. I recently upgraded my Wi-Fi, so it shouldn't be an issue as often as it was before, but it still might occasionally flare up, and hopefully doesn't interrupt things too much. Next question. Someone's asking, how do we address abusive use of power in the library economy, such as discrimination within libraries toward people or groups?
I mean, it's the same. There's a how do you address the abuse of power in society as a whole? One of the big things you do is you distribute power. You prevent, unaccountable centralization of power in a small amount of people's hands, and you create institutions of democratic participation, accountability. The principle of like measure twice, cut once, having multiple people having oversight on things, and democratically distribute power, I think, is the primary way to help prevent unaccountable use of power.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's kind of like it depends, and like what sort of power are we talking about, and yeah, what are the community systems set up to deal with it? If we're talking about like abuse of the items in the library economy, I think you can have systems of graduated sanctions, but also mixed with like education and conversation with the people involved, trying to figure out what's going on and why they're uh, not using the system in a way that's benefiting everyone. I could give more details on that, but
So I'm really trying to like copy and paste a lot of the different questions that are popping up, but I think I'm gonna have to pause on answering the chat questions for now, so that we could kind of get through the backlog.
yeah, it makes sense.
Um, Someone had asked, besides book libraries, what kind of library would you suggest for a starting point? And I don't mind answering this question in particular. I think that anywhere and everywhere really is where we can begin. Whatever is immediately accessible to you and to your personal situation is where you can get started. Because I mean, I can't really make a sweeping declaration about what moves should be made first, because it really depends on circumstances.
Yeah, one principle I think that is useful is that I think things like tools, things like camping equipment, things that you use once in a while and then don't use and have to store for long periods of time are kind of ripe for librarification in a way that like I think like furniture and home appliances and other things like that could also be turned into a library system, but I think it's slightly less uh, uh, urgent for things like that to like since you would keep like a table for years probably until you moved or redecorate it or something, you would probably just keep the same table for a really long time. I think it's not a good area to start with.
Yeah, it's. I mean, stuff has already started in a way in a variety. Like tool libraries exist in many communities. Like we have one here in Vancouver that I think you pay a deposit to get a part of. And but in terms of the political platform of like moving towards a library society, I think um, a good a good thing to use from this framework is through sharing things, you really can create accessible abundance. There's like for lack of a better term, an economic benefit to pooling resources, like with your neighbors or with your communities or with organizations you're a part of. So I think a good step organizationally in building a political movement is to give people things that they need or want, give them access to things that they need or want. And so that's one of the reasons that like mutual aid, where people are feeding each other and things like that are so beneficial. I think that whether it's, clothing, tools, things like, I don't know, video games or other media, there's a variety of things that people could build their own small scale sharing experiments and sort of build this patchwork of different sharing experiments towards different ends. That seems like a reasonable first step to me. You could also look at a bigger institutional thing. Like you could try going step by step makes sense, and starting small makes sense in general. But one could imagine, say, like a program where people get together for the purposes of efficiently recycling damaged materials or repairing damaged materials. People could, like, I would love to be able to give up stuff in my house that I want to get rid of, especially when stuff is in that territory of like, it's worth money. It'd be horrible to throw it out, but it takes so much work to sell it and that sort of thing. It'd be great if I could just forward that onto like a collective that could make the best possible use of it. So I see that as a useful foothold in the like pragmatic realm towards a library society.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what about the internet side of things? How do y'all see library economy being implemented there? I think we kind of covered that in our skit, but if you guys want to extrapolate.
Yeah, the first thing is like stop criminalizing people who are already building the best library in human history. Like digital access, people having digital access to like movies, music, etc. is great. Like we don't need to give a bunch of profit to some arbitrary middleman like Spotify in order to give everyone access to music. Just stop criminalizing the sharing economy online is a really good first step there. But you could also even formalize or institutionalize like, a global multilingual translation project like Hyper Library that's receives funding from wherever under the current system, and that would be massively beneficial. It might be a good first step thing to advocate for, the universal library. Because when I think about that subject, I find it makes me very passionate to think about what it would be like to give everyone access to all information in a coordinated way, and to stop forcing people to go into like the gray market websites with like shoddy ads, like trying to hijack their computer or whatever to access media. I think that would be great.
That would be great. I agree.
And archive.org is doing some stuff like that. They're making a cool legal argument that if they get a single book and archive.org digitizes a book and allows you to borrow it, they actually have the book in person, and they can digitally lend it to you for like 14 days or whatever. And they'll only lend it out to one person at a time because they only have one in their library. and they're trying to make the legal argument right now. They're in a legal battle over the right to do this, and we should all hope that they win. They're doing really, really cool stuff.
I agree. I agree. A lot of books that I have not been able to find on LibGen, I found on like thearchive.org.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible resource.
What is the process of actually no, let me not cover that question yet. Um,
I think, well, this is one of those questions where it's like, are we talking about a fully realized library society where the entire economy has been decommodified and brought into the commons? Because if we're talking about questions about like, I think and other forms of graduated sanctions for people who aren't following the rules of the library, but
I think
specifically
it
money.
dropped for a second there.
I think here.
Yes,
I'm
like as
just
soon as I
gonna-
mentioned LibGen, the stream started playing up. You just want to start?
So can you start that over again?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about a fully realized library economy, that in that case we wouldn't have money, and so you wouldn't have late fees or what was the word, deposits. But I do think there would be forms of buy-in and forms of graduated sanctions for people who aren't following the rules. But I specifically with money and with cash deposits, I think in terms of creating libraries of various things right now under the current capitalist economy, things like late fees and necessary in order to function under capitalism.
Yeah. 'Cause we still
So I
have to,
wouldn't
fund
rule
the
those.
building of the system before the system is fully built. You know, like in the transition
Yeah, I think
period.
deposit.
I think.
So my general inclination is away from late fees, even in the transitionary phases.
Something is seriously wrong with this stream.
Hey, yeah.
But
It's us.
yeah. So I guess on the topic of transitioning, how do you all see that sort of like library economy transitioning taking place?
Yeah, a rebuilding of society in an ecological, directly democratic vision in a way that challenges property relations. So it's a big thing to do. It's complex, and it's how we play different pieces of the overall puzzle together in harmony is how it is achieved successfully. So there's like narrative work, counter hegemony, spreading popular ideas. Like we're doing here today, is one of the fronts of this. There's also prefigurative work, or sometimes called nowtopias. It's like building the world that we want to see, and the world as it is. And then there's also what Eric Olin Wright called non-reform reforms, which is like when a reform is put through political mechanisms that frees up more human freedom. So examples of this might be something like basic income or guaranteed basic services, an alternative, or the like universal pre-K to give parents more freedom, things like citizens assemblies on climate. These are all good. They're all inadequate by themselves. It's only when you're bringing them together through an overall sort of like counter hegemonic movement.
Yeah, there has to be a real strategy that these things are connected to. It's not enough to like be sort of doing these sort of disconnected tactics. They have to be kind of rooted in a strategy with certain goals in mind that they're working towards, long term and short term.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, just doing a library of tools in the current society, I think, is good. But unless it's part of the advocacy for changing society over to this type of system on as a whole. I don't think it's necessarily moving us that far in that direction just on its own. But yeah, I think it can be attacked on all different levels, from like individuals with their friends and social connections creating systems of sharing between them, and also larger systems of trying to confederate and join together those things, or even advocating for change within current systems, taking the libraries as they currently exist in society and expanding them out or increasing funding towards them, increasing what they can do, while also being careful not to be overburdening the library system or trying to ask the single book libraries that currently exist to do everything, because we also can't do that. This has to be creating more interlocking institutions rather than trying to just shove everything off onto overworked library workers in the current system. But I think you can decommodify things at different stages, and starting with things that are more necessary for people is a good place to start in general. I could imagine transitionary periods where things like food, health, housing, clothing, education, etc., is all available through sharing systems like this, but more luxury items aren't yet, and that still operates under a market system. There could be times where there's parallel institutions or hybrid systems between property and access economies, although we'd want to be.
Tool libraries I've been familiar with aren't oriented towards a political, a social revolution and a change in the way that we do human business, and the building coalitions and so on is part of that.
Exactly. Since another question I have copy pasted here, someone had asked, when you say democratic systems, do you have like a certain voting system in mind, runoff, approval, etc.? I believe, and this is just my personal stance on popular assemblies, direct democracies, affinity groups, whatever the case may be, that there can be no like one voting system that will accommodate all the different needs or decisions of a group. I think there'll be times where a consensus-based system should be established, sort of like what the Zaptistas do, where they have the consensus as the baseline, the standard, but at the same time, they are willing to fall back on majority voting when certain, or supermajority voting when certain conditions are met. But how do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I pretty much totally agree with that. I think especially for like smaller groups and for certain types of decisions, consensus is kind of ideal. If you can reach an answer to a democratic question that everybody agrees with, that's obviously the best approach, and it's something to shoot for in a lot of cases. But I think for other things, simple majorities, super majorities, and even potentially systems where there's weighted voting for expertise on certain things. Like one thing that people always say against direct democracy is like, oh, should everyone have a vote over how to make the wings on a plane? And it's kind of goofy because I don't think anyone's ever asked for that, and nobody would ask for that. But in theory, where there's things like that, where there's like an engineer's idea of what to do there, is going to be more useful than a random person's. You can explore systems to make sure that we're respecting expertise and doing things that work properly, while at the same time ensuring that everybody has legitimate say in the process and that nobody's voice is being ignored or spoken over just because someone's an expert. I think there's I think that conversation and is a big part of what's going to make democracy work and compromise. But in terms of like specific voting systems, it's another thing that's like, well, it depends on what we're deciding, who's deciding it, and all those contingencies.
Yeah, something, I mean, in democracy, the thing that I'd really want to emphasize is like people's individual expressiveness and the system's responsiveness to that expressiveness, especially when it relates to areas that affect them profoundly. So, an ideal system, I think, would be a layered democracy. And if you look at how even representative democracy systems, which are much simpler than what I would propose, work in practice. They're very complex with multiple overlapping authorities, bodies of expertise, and so on, different jurisdictions, municipal versus federal, etc. So I imagine an ideal system being very expressive, that people can express their position on things and have it actually matter in a fair way, a process that they can see the fairness and the way that it works. But it would also be layered. And so, like, for example, the democracy of library users versus the democracy of library workers might have different priorities. And having a good democratic system would be one where those priorities could be balanced in a fair way.
Agreed, agreed. Because you don't want, say, for example, the interests of the people who have volunteered to administer, maintain the system to be, drowned out by the demand of people who are, doing other things.
Yeah.
I suppose, I mean, there are a couple different ways, a couple different categories of these questions. There are some very practical ones. There are some that are very much concerned with abuses of the system. But before we get into those, how do y'all feel about, and this is something that somebody in the comments of the original video raised to me, this, I'm not sure exactly the ties of the phrase, but someone had recalled the World Economic Forum and tied it to this whole idea that you will own nothing and you will be happy. And they said they tried to associate it with this system. Why do you think that is a false, I guess, comparison?
Yeah, well, I think the most fun, like my understanding of the World Economic Forum's proposal for owning nothing and being happy is not that nobody will own anything or will have shared common property between everyone where nobody's privileged above anyone else, but rather poor people won't own anything and they'll pay rich people for access to something like what they call a quote unquote sharing economy, but that is using the benefits, the economic benefits of that sharing to benefit a small group of elite business owners who are going to be the recipients of all profits of this system. So they will still own things. They'll actually own everything, and it's just everyone else who will own nothing. And I think that's kind of the implication there behind that. I see a lot of right-wing people who are concerned about, I think it's Klaus Schwab said that was kind of like a they're coming for our property type thing. And I think they are to some extent, like they would, rich capital owners would like to own everything themselves. But that's like, yeah, pretty much the opposite of this idea.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
not
wish
that you own nothing, it's that everyone owns everything,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a more fundamental. I wish I was better familiar with both their specific proposals and the conspiracy responses to those proposals. I've seen it before, but I think they do not have the building of a directly democratic and ecological society in mind. We can look at the capitalist model of the sharing economy in practice. You have people being exploited through ride sharing services. You have information ideas like cartoon shows are being taken down off of the Discovery HBO thing because it costs more money to pay out the creators fairly than just to remove it from the public record and like memory hole it against the wishes of the creators, while owning a exclusive intellectual property right to distribute them. It wouldn't surprise me to see also like, managerial capitalist owner types trying to pick up and pull on library socialist style ideas because of their ecological benefits, because of their like information access benefits and so on, but they'll do so in a self-serving way that does not address the root issues of the problem. It'll be,
Exactly. It'll probably be something more akin to a subscription model, where instead of like actually owning the DVD, you have to subscribe to get the DVD, like for a certain amount each month.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you kind of saw that with a lot of these digital programs, right? It used to be like a one-off purchase, and you get the suite or the system, whatever the case may be, the program, the software, and now everything is a subscription model, and it sucks.
Yeah, I would change their phrase to like you, instead of you will own nothing and you will be happy. I would say something like you will have access to everything beyond your wildest dreams in ways that I can't even explain now, and you will be happy. So it's a little different.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose to turn to that, because I've had some accusations that the library economy is promising abundance and it's not ecologically sustainable. One person had said that everything everywhere, so the role is incredibly destructive. Was there any thought given to the oncoming climate chaos in regards to librarianism?
Right. Yeah. So the answer to this question is yes. The climate issue is foundational to where we even started to find this idea profound and interesting in the first place. Because if just using the example of a speedboat as a standby metaphor for a semi-luxury good, a speedboat, if everyone has their own speedboat, you need to manufacture a speedboat for everyone out of raw materials, which has a huge environmental impact. But if you instead share a speedboat and allow everyone to have access to a speedboat when they actually need it through some sort of fair system, you can produce way, way less speedboats for a much, much greater amount of speedboat time and speedboat access. So there's an ecological benefit to a library system. But it's also true that's not sufficient. Like there are things that you could not produce because of their ecological benefit in an ecological society. And I think that we should take that seriously as well. Like there's maybe an argument against making too many speedboats, even if the demand for speedboats is really high based on environmental limits. But the way I see this sort of library socialist layer democracy working in practice, it would accommodate the ecological impacts within the system itself.
Are you trying to tell me that we can't like borrow nuclear missiles from the local library of everything?
There's just an abundance of nuclear missiles for everybody. Easily available. Yeah, no, it's I think if you want to have a system that provides an irreducible minimum of everything people need to everyone in abundance, that's also going to just inherently include some things not being available either at all or being available like very rarely as things that you could maybe do once or twice or something per year or per decade even, depending on what it is. And I think like oh shit, I lost my second thought.
I just want to pick up on the nuclear weapon thing. Like there are some things that shouldn't exist that are crimes against humanity.
Yeah. Like maybe we don't need like one of those plastic toys that are just like packaged in more plastic, that is again packaged in more plastic, that is then again packaged in more plastic, shipped on a boat, wrapped in plastic, in a shipping container, shipped across the Pacific Ocean. Like maybe we don't need all that.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about the word efficiency. This was something that Richard Wolff pointed out and blew my mind years back. Is like efficiency, financial efficiency is one thing. So it could be financially efficient to ship these plastic toys wrapped in 5 layers of plastic back and forth across the world every day, all day, not even reaching any consumer. That might be financially efficient. You might be able to make profit off of it. But when we're talking about actual real world efficiency, we're talking about resource throughputs and the limits of the natural world. So if we actually want to be efficient in the real sense, the sense that makes or breaks human destiny, which is the environmental crisis, then yeah, we have to stop doing stupid, silly stuff like shipping mangoes across the world to be chopped up, then shipping them back across the world to be put into new containers. That sort of stuff happens too frequently under this system.
I remember the thing I was going to say, which is that I think when we're thinking about abundance and giving people access to what they need, that doesn't necessarily mean getting access to every single thing that you want. And I think that most of the things that we want are in order to meet needs. So it's like asking, like, will there be unlimited potatoes in the library economy? And like the answer is probably yes, but like potatoes themselves aren't a need. You just need food. You need starch, you need carbohydrates. Like it might be that where you live, you get a lot more corn and wheat than potatoes, and potatoes are more plentiful somewhere else. And maybe they don't get shipped around the world quite as much, and it's kind of a luxury, not a luxury thing, but a less common thing where you are. But the core of that would be making sure people have enough of what they need, which is enough food. So
Exactly.
potatoes and corn and wheat are all strategies for meeting that need. And you would go based on what strategies are sustainable and ecological in your particular location.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
what,
there's one
when
thing
we
I want
talk
to
about,
add to that
sure.
regarding potatoes, and I guess to I suppose reference an example from my own life, or rather from my parents' life. Back in their day, because keep in mind we live in Trinidad and Tobago. It's an island, right, in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Being on an island, some things are extremely expensive because shipping them is just, it's kind of out of the way in some cases. And so, especially back in the day, some things were extremely rare. It's like it was a treat when it came to the country. So, like these days, you can get an apple anywhere. Sorry about that. You can get an apple anywhere in the world, pretty much, and anywhere in any grocery store locally. But back in the day, apples used to be like every couple months, once in a year kind of thing. Instead of being available year round, it was more of a treat that was only accessible at certain periods of time. And of course, this is under a capitalist system, but just to reference the whole idea that maybe not everything will be accessible all the time and it's livable. Speaking as somebody who does not have access to Amazon Prime 1 day shipping, I manage, I'm able to live without having access to whatever because I have some wage slave bringing me things to my door. Like I have to wait weeks for packages and stuff to arrive in some cases, even something as simple as like a small book. So some things might slow down in terms of some things may be less accessible in some particular cases, but when you balance and when you really take into account, things could slow down a bit and be a little bit less accessible in certain ways, and I can live with that. Or we continue with producing everything as fast as we can and like driving straight into this wall, going out in a blazing, fiery ball of fury. I think I'd prefer the former.
Yeah, as a consumer, I don't want to be up. I don't want it to be up to me to stop the environmental crisis with my purchasing decisions. Like I'd really prefer that to be baked in, and if that means getting less varieties of apples sometime in certain seasons for me to not have to weigh whether or not I'm destroying the planet when I pick up an apple, then I'll take that trade-off. But I also think we can provide a really high, there's a variety of methodologies that we can provide a really high standard of living. So it's not necessarily true that people will have access to less things, but it's a possibility if we're putting the environment first. And I think that we should put the environment first when it comes
Yeah.
down to it.
And the comments are pointing out things can be preserved. That is correct. Like a lot of times things are unnecessarily wasted when they can very easily be stored. Like someone referenced that apple can be made into cider or it can be canned. And that's true. Also to point out, apples are not grown locally. Like that had to be shipped in, just for sake of clarification. Like it's not an indigenous fruit. That would be like mangoes and stuff. Well, not even that technically, but yeah.
I want to say on potatoes, I'm a big fan of potatoes. I'm like a potato fan, like the way that some people are fans of Marvel,
Are
Star Wars. Like
are
I'm
you
a
saying
fan
you're a
of
Mr.
potatoes.
Potato Head?
I absolutely. I'll wear that badge proudly. An interesting thing about potatoes is that they actually grow really well, like all over the world. When they were introduced to the world economy during the colonial era, they increased the amount of caloric density in them increased the rate of obesity in other colonies. And we have because they're an amazing food and you can't stop eating them because they're so delicious and incredible. Um, I just wanted to give a shout out to the indigenous Peruvian farmers who facilitated the domestication of potatoes. From my understanding, on the mountains near Lake Titicaca, there is a greater variation in potato types there than anywhere else in the world put together.
Lake what?
Lake Titicaca. It was a Simpsons joke once, but it's a real place.
Okay, all right.
I wanted to throw in too. I used to work at a grocery store, and the amount of food that gets thrown out at grocery stores is incredibly disgusting. And yeah, just on like part of like the whole library socialism idea is to reduce disposability and to not have things just be thrown out and thought of as trash, but that every item either gets returned to the library to be reused again or returned to production systems in some sense to be broken down and used for something else. So rather than like, oh, our display of apples are going a bit bad, so if nobody buys them before today, we're going to throw them all out into the trash compactor, there would be systems set up to make sure that nothing is being disposed of, and that like, yeah, instead of throwing out tons and tons of food all the time, it would be made into things and used as a baseline for like removing that disposability element to the capitalist economy. It gets back to economic efficiency again. Like it's more economically efficient for them to just throw it out, but it's not resource efficient.
Yeah, and also potato fans, y'all had to try curry potato if you haven't already. Absolutely delicious.
I'd love to.
Is that a local dish?
Yeah. I don't know that it's made anywhere else.
I would love to try it.
I think it's an innovation of our Indo-Trinidadian compatriots.
Nice.
First opportunity I get.
For sure. And I guess as we on this topic, do y'all want to talk a bit about the link between degrowth and the library economy?
Yeah. So I think we early on in our understanding of library socialism, we felt like that library socialism was a really cool middle ground between the principles of degrowth, which is like having an economy that isn't pretensed on infinite growth year after year, doubling every 25 years or something like that, which obviously contributes greatly to the ecological crisis, and also the sort of luxury space communism meme about like abundance for all and so on. We thought that the library society was it was a way of thinking about both these things at the same time in a complementary and complete way, luxury for everyone while also shrinking the economy, or not, at the very least, not needing to grow it by definition. And generally, the more that I've read and understood about degrowth, the more I've found to like about it. There's a key concept in degrowth, from my understanding, is convivial technology, which is it's an idea from Ivan Illich, and it's the concept is technology for living together. And they propose that we move from industrial technology towards technology for living together. And I just think that's such a brilliant, beautiful, wonderful idea. And the convivial technology has now entered my lexicon from the degrowth source.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. On the topic of degrowth, that is the next video of mine coming soon to a YouTube channel near you. So look out for that. It's sort of the conclusion to what I've been building towards, from the importance of imagination to, anti-work to the commons to the library economy. Like, it's all meant to click into place. So hopefully people enjoy that.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it's interesting too. We've covered a lot of overlapping topics over the last year, and we also have a degrowth episode coming out soon. So yeah, it's
Awesome.
cool how in sync we are on this stuff. Because yeah, like the common
Yeah,
stuff.
like I noticed you guys are doing stuff on youth liberation now. That's amazing to see.
We did a couple episodes earlier, and we've got a few more in the pipe on it.
I haven't caught up on that series yet, so bear with me. Um, on to the next. On to the next. I still have a couple left in the backlog. Let me roll some of these questions into one. People have asked again about, so I guess to reiterate, about what happens if people don't return things, what happens if people hog the resources, what happens if you accidentally or intentionally destroy something from the library. So I guess we're just talking in general about transgressions toward the commons and how we deal with that. And to start off with, I would say a really good resource on this is Eleanor Ostrom's Governing the Commons, because one of the 7 principles that she discusses is, of course, graduated sanctions. Another one is monitoring. Another one is like conflict resolution mechanisms. Those 3 principles, among the others, can I think curb a lot of these issues. And lost my train of thought there, but yeah, what I'm saying.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
no, yeah,
There's-
she's totally right and a really good source. And we're prison abolitionists, anti-punitive justice people. That's something we've been interested in for a while. So yeah, like I don't see an ideal situation where there's like harsh punitive actions for violating
Yeah.
the library principles.
Like if the person, one part of the question that I left out was, would they be restricted from the library of everything and condemned to either hunt, gather, beg, or leave and hopefully find a new community or starve? So
Yeah, I would
I don't
say
think that's the direction we're going in.
No starving. We had a little thought experiment about this earlier today about the food is a perfect example. There's your need of getting food should never. There's nothing you can do. You could be the most horrible person in history, and you would still get enough food to live. But I can imagine scenarios where if, say, someone is repeatedly violating the norms of something like a buffet, like contaminating the food intentionally, yada yada yada, they could be excluded from that buffet or other places of communal eating on a temporary basis with opportunities to, make it up to other people, earn their right back, and so on. That seems reasonable enough to me in a complete society. But also, it's not just about the stick, as in like taking things away, taking away access to certain luxuries could be part of the graduated sanctions, as Ostrom puts it. Repeatedly doing things loses you some access to luxuries because you're interfering with other people's enjoyment. The that, but we also need carrots. So like people are acting out often because their needs aren't met. And I think people have this general sense of like, you see people doing things in public and you're like, oh, there's something wrong with them that they would be yelling at people, or whatever. But it's not that there's something like existentially deeply wrong with their soul or something like that. It's that we're in this system that is so dehumanizing and we're humiliated all the time. And like, I think you want to make sure that if someone is acting out and causing trouble, that it's not just like, oh, now we're going to take our ball and go home. You can't participate in our society anymore. But there's proactive, personal, one-to-one attention given to them and their needs, with the understanding that they are a redeemable person. They are not. It's not like everyone has the possibility to change. Everyone has the possibility to learn about why their behavior is destructive and to move on from it. And that should be our ideal of justice and corrective of people's behavior.
Yeah, I think too, like they mentioned accidentally breaking something. I think in that case, if it's like every once in a while you break something, like that's just normal use, wear and tear. Things are going to break down sometimes. And I think that, and accidents are going to happen sometimes. So in like most of those cases, you could participate in repairing it yourself, and there'd be like, maker spaces and instructions and help available to people who want to do that. But I think it would also be possible in most cases to just return something to the library, which would already be in a constant process of refurbishing and making sure that the items that are within it are being made as whole again as possible, repaired and kept up with, and
Yeah.
you would return it and get a different one, and it would be repaired and then lent out again to someone else. And I think that in terms of like sanctions for people, or oh yeah, no, one of the parts of that question was what about someone who chronically hogs resources, or someone who takes things out just to trade them for other resources. I think there's a lot of assumptions there about like what the outside part of society would be like, but if we're talking about a fully realized library socialist culture, it will be more convenient to just return something to the library when you're done using it than to take on the burden of maintaining it, storing it, even trading it with other people, finding some individual who wants it and who's going to give you something else in return for it. Like
Yeah.
that, it's one of the classic problems with a barter system that the people who advocate for money always say is that like under a barter system you have to find someone who wants exactly what you have to give and who's giving exactly what you want. But the whole point of the library system and one of the laws of library science is a book for every reader and a reader for every book. So the institution is there to make those connections so that you can get what you need when you need it, and then when you don't need it anymore, it's not a burden to you. You don't have to take care of it. You don't have to wonder where it goes or what to do with it. You can just return it.
Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, just think in terms of like how many things are just stored inside of our homes that we barely use. You know, they're just sitting there collecting dust. When someone else could
Making us
make
feel guilty.
use of it. Exactly. But then someone brought up another concern, right? Which is about the buildup of broken items. Like even if they are being repaired and reused, they think that the rate of break would still be too high. To that, I think I would say that for one, we would be organizing a lot of resources to figure out ways to do the opposite of planned obsolescence, basically, to make things last as long as we possibly can. Um, I mean, there's my grandmother in for one example. She had this mixer. Um, that mixer is over 40 years old, and it still works to this day. I mean, it's been repaired a couple of times, but it still persists. It has made a multiplicity of cakes, you know? Um, so, because we are so used to planned obsolescence, it can be difficult to imagine that, hey, you know, maybe a computer or maybe a appliance or whatever can last like more than a decade. Like, remember when fridges lasted for a decently long period of time, when toasters could actually last for like a decent amount of time. So there's that aspect of it. But I think also I'd want to address the idea that I don't mean to say that person intended to imply this, but I'm just using their point to extrapolate. The library economy isn't like we cease all production and henceforth only rely upon things in landfills, things that already exist, and just reuse and repair them. You know what I mean? Like we're still gonna be
Yeah.
producing stuff at a significantly reduced scale because you know ecological limits, but we're still gonna produce things. And we're not going to have to move like have things passing down for like 12 generations before we replace them. Like we can still replace things that would take a lot more resources to repair, kind of thing. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think so.
I think also like thinking about this holistically, even when things break down and it's no longer feasible to repair them, there's going to be things that can be done with breaking those things down into base resources again to be used in some other production process. I think like thinking about when items reach the end of their life cycle, what other things they can be used for or parts of them can be used for should be a systematic process that's like part of the production, use, reuse, reproduction cycle that goes on indefinitely.
Yeah, I think actually in one of his pieces, Bookchin says that we could give people a higher standard of living entirely subsisting on things that were taken from landfills that already exist. And I think that's probably true. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly. We'll consult with the information as it comes towards us, right? As we navigate the ecological crisis as a society or as a species. But I also think that some stuff will probably likely be commissioned from raw materials in the most sustainable way possible. But also we will be looking to the landfills and dumps of the world and trying to improve our technology for sorting things into base pieces for the purposes of reuse. I'm sure there's like a lot of stuff in landfills right now. I think actually, I don't have the stat on hand. I remember there's a stat about gold and like the comparison of the amount of gold underground and the amount of gold in landfills was really surprising. I can't remember the exact ratio, but it's gold in landfills is doing better than you would think.
I could imagine. Could definitely imagine.
Just got to sort through the diapers in order to find it.
Yeah, I don't look forward to that. But I guess I'm picturing right now like a USSR style, like, comrade, you've been assigned to the landfill mines. You must you must dig through the diapers until we can find something usable.
It's more like diaper diggers get extra time on the 12 yachts that exist globally that you only get on once a decade. You get an extra use if you do diaper sorting.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
yeah, no,
I think we're gonna create a culture where we have to like thank them for their service like all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, diaper diggers are braver than the troops,
Truly.
and we don't even know what troops are anymore.
Yeah. A lighter question. How much of the crews and truck skits were improvised? All of it.
Yeah, it's the same. We use the same. It's the way we always do it on our show too. Is we'll figure out the point. We'll figure out the key joke, the shape of it, sort of roughly, and then we'll improvise within it, and then we'll cut it down in editing. So it's just there's no ums and ahs in there. There's no pitching jokes back and forth to each other.
Yeah.
So it's kind of similar to, I think Curb Your Enthusiasm does their show that way too. It's like they know what they need to achieve in the scene, and then they just do a couple takes on it and put it together in the edit. That's why it has that kind of conversational mumblecore style.
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, you guys have inspired me. I got a lot of good feedback about the skits, and for those of you who really enjoyed the skits, you'll have to go and listen to Seriously Wrong. Each one of the episodes has me belly up, losing my voice with laughter. So definitely check it out. And they've also inspired me to get into that sort of improv style myself. I'm hoping to incorporate some skits and maybe even some poetry in future videos to shake things up a little bit, since I've been doing this for like 2 years now. You know?
Yeah, no, it's nice. And yeah, I would also recommend everyone check out your videos, though we are on your YouTube channel, so they probably know
That's
that.
true,
But
that's true.
likewise, I don't know if I'm belly up laughing every video, but every video I'm like, yeah, damn, that's true.
I appreciate that. And I guess another more technical question. how would we accommodate the fluctuating demands of items depending on time?
Yeah, it depends on the item, but I think it's the right question to. It's a really good question to ask when thinking about the pragmatics of this. There are some things that it's okay if there's certain seasons that they're less available than others. You need to figure out some sort of fair system for distributing access to them, like waiting lists, lotteries, etc. But when it comes to things that are, you know, basic needs, or that their absence is going to be felt in a profound way, then you need to develop either through, you know, moving things around or having alternatives to meet those needs. It's a complex big thing in practice, but those principles can guide us in that.
Absolutely. And another technical question. I'm nearing the end now of the written down questions. What would be the rules for checking out housing? We already have a library of things to understand tool checkout, but how would it be different for housing? Like how many could be checked out at a time? Would there be housing used exclusively for long-term and short-term checkouts, or is it all just up for grabs? Would rules change depending on the type of housing being checked out? I really appreciated this question. I think it's the exact kind of, you know, creative exploration of the idea. Because I just, as an aside, I was like, what about like libraries of housing? And you know, now this person is building out that system a bit, asking these kind of questions. I just want to say I really appreciate the question, first of all. I'll let Sean and Aaron answer, and then I'll add to whatever they say.
Yeah, I was going to say also, this is a good example of how like the Q&As are this sort of process of exploration. Like having dialogue about library socialism is awesome because people will bring up these questions that the things that are on their mind really help sort of like shape our thinking. And it's like we apply these principles to it as best we can. And there's really fascinating outcomes at the end. I think there's a few implied, I think the implications of these questions are like nail on the head. Like a person taking out one house from the library is enough. Having one place to live is enough. Maybe if you're on vacation, you could keep your house at home, but have access to a temporary space. Having a difference between permanent and temporary spaces makes perfect sense. I've got kind of a vision, an idea of like, imagine all the hotels in your city or your town were turned into places to like welcome newcomers to the area and put them up with a place to stay, or people who are just traveling through. That kind of stuff is really beautiful to imagine the possibilities. And yeah, you wouldn't want to allow for hoarding. You would want to make sure that everyone has their basic needs met first and foremost. But there's a lot of complex practical things that would have to be worked out over time when it comes to like, not all houses, there's no standardized houses, right? There's location, there's type of house, amount of bedrooms, amenities. There's accessibility concerns for people with disabilities. So you want to make sure that houses that are most accessible are given to people who have disabilities that are relevant to those accessibility features are given first priority towards those houses, for example. So it would have to be a combination of factors to work all these things out. But I could see sort of multiple parallel systems or tracks of housing set up to allow, make sure that everyone has access to a home in a fair way.
Yeah, I think like generally the hope would be that like wherever you go on the planet, you would be able to be welcomed there and have somewhere to stay. And I think that could be achieved through, like this question is implying a combination between long-term and short-term dwellings and prioritization systems like Sean is mentioning. I think that without overproducing housing or just having like tons and tons of empty units all the time, we could create an abundance to where like wherever you go, there's somewhere you could stay. And you know, there would be systems likely for like checking into that first. Like if you want to travel somewhere, like how much travel does this place kind of allow? You don't necessarily want an infinite number of people coming through a given area if they can't sustain that. So there might be places where it's like there's fewer short-term rentals available than there are people who want to use them, and you get on waiting lists and such like that. But I could also see a lot of places being like just sort of open for travel whenever, because there's enough room available, at least most of the time during the year.
Of course, with certain expectations, like you can't just roll up in somebody's community and mess up their stuff, you know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And I think there would be certain situations where, sort of like the, and this is, I suppose, an undeveloped idea, but I just thought of something having seen Vice um, video the other day regarding intentionally isolated peoples who have chosen to, you know, avoid the wider world, particularly in the Amazon rainforest, was the what they had been talking about. Or when you think about that particular island, the Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean, um, I think there may be instances where communities that have experienced certain trauma may, or communities existing in certain fragile ecosystems may not be able to accommodate that kind of influx of people, particularly like communities that have certain health related vulnerabilities, might be something to consider.
Yeah, too. I think there's a lot of damaging effects to tourism as well in the current capitalist system, and kind of like akin to what we were saying about luxury foods and whatnot. A lot of that is going to end up being determined by what is actually sustainable and realistic and non-damaging to the communities and the ecologies of the specific places. Yeah, yeah.
And I would imagine that something like this Nelson person was referenced, replace landlords with land stewards. Current landlords just call them property managers anyway. I suppose something like there may be people who volunteer to take care of certain buildings or take care of certain areas, maintain them, that kind of thing. Or it could be like a rotating system kind of thing, so that things don't degrade over time. That there's some effort for maintenance.
Yeah, definitely. We would want to take care of our housing just as well as we take care of any other items in the library. You'd want to build them to last as long as possible, and part of that is upkeep and maintaining them constantly.
Yeah, and I think key concerns around housing is like you'd want to make sure that there's no homelessness. Someone in chat said you probably want to have more homes than there are people. I agree entirely. It'd be great to have a system where there's constantly slightly more empty units than are needed, and but there's also no homelessness. Like if we can abolish homelessness, if we can abolish displacement, people being pushed from neighborhoods that they have connections to or grew up in. Basically, people being pushed out of neighborhoods against their will, whether or not they grew up there, is a pretty bad thing. So, like, we can determine principles for what an ethical housing distribution system would look like, and the practical matters of it would have to be worked out in practice over a long time.
I think too, I saw in the comments very, very early on when we started streaming, someone mentioned Earthships, and I don't know that much about Earthships, but I think I watched some documentaries or YouTube videos a while back, and the one thing, or there's many things that sound awesome about that. I don't know how widely applicable that specific system is to everything globally, but the principle of building housing that has minimal ecological impact on the surrounding environment and requires minimal inputs for things like heating and cooling, and just designing housing to best fit the ecologies in which it exists would, I think, be another sort of principle to think about when creating housing.
Hobbit punk, as one person says.
Hobbit punk, yeah, hell yeah.
Another two for one question. Actually, before I ask that one, let me ask this one because it kind of leads one into the other two. Other than just capitalism, what are the institutions that are incompatible with the library economy? For one, I would say, well, I mean, private property is kind of parts of capitalism. I would say the state, as an institution is not compatible with the idea of the library economy, because the library economy is ultimately participatory and horizontal in organization, and to have a body of people, a structure above that system would kind of, not kind of, it will, corrupt the the smooth running, the democratic running of that system.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind most obviously for me is prisons. I feel like there's kind of I feel like prisons and libraries are, I won't elaborate on this. I feel like they're kind of opposites of each other. No, I will elaborate if you want. But I feel like the prisons definitely need to be abolished. I don't see a library prison society being a very good idea.
Yeah. I think another one is just really any sort of system of social oppression, any sort of structure of social oppression, um, racism, sexism, ableism, transphobia, homophobia, just queerphobia. These sorts of systems are incompatible with the distribution and the free distribution and collaboration and solidarity and aid and all the things that go into the functioning of a library economy. The whole point of a library economy is collective ownership, and you can't exactly do that when you're excluding people or marginalizing their voices in the participatory process.
Yeah, I think there's an irreducible minimum of respect and equality that kind of goes along with, like, I think that's a genuine need people have in society, is to be seen as a equal member of society, despite any of these historical categories that people have tried to create hierarchical systems over. So yeah, it goes against the idea of like an equal society where people's needs are met to have hierarchical systems like that.
Yeah, and the ethics of complementarity is built on this idea that differences can and often are more than the sum of their parts. That through differences are generative. So we benefit by having a society that has room for everyone and has room for all differences to play off each other, where the space between things becomes, the space between difference becomes sort of a vibrant, participatory, mutually respectful space. I saw someone in the chat also mentioned disability rights, disability justice. And I think this is something I take a really strong influence from disability justice on, is how, thinking in terms of non-hierarchical difference, and how valuable and beautiful it is to build a society where there is not just room for everyone, but where everyone's contributions are encouraged and are respected as uniquely rooted in whatever differences, whatever place that people come from. It forms a complementary whole that's bigger than the sum of its parts. And all these discriminatory hierarchical ideas run contrast to this idea, which is also, I think, parallel metaphorically to the library is something that is bigger than the sum of its parts, that all the differences of books within the library is part of what makes a library this incredible thing that's, as good as all books, where every reader has their own book and every book has its reader. And also ecology, ecosystems function as a complementary whole, and there's variations within that, and ecosystems collapse, and there's sometimes contradictions between species who fight each other out, fight it out with each other when they enter each other's biomes. But in general, an ecological system functions by having all of these differences sort of fitting together in a whole that creates a stasis. So I see all these issues as very connected, but the when it comes in particular to discrimination and hierarchical ideas in that context, I think it's important to root ourselves in an ethics of complementarity that highlights that difference is generative, and we can create things that are bigger than the sum of its parts by standing together. Solidarity is walking together even if you're walking on different paths.
Yep, I agree. I agree. And so that's leading into the two different questions that have rolled into one. And the person who had asked one of the questions followed it up with an additional question. Um, in hearing our response to the question we just asked. So the first person that asked, if a revolution is imminent, how do we go about ensuring a successful one, and how we rebuild after one? And then the person who just added to their question, the Marshall, they asked, can library economy be implemented to usurp capitalism, or does it require capitalism to be dealt with first? How do we deal with getting rid of capitalism if we, and this is what they added after, how do we deal with getting rid of capitalism if we can't implement libraries first? Should we not make first less efficient libraries so we can usurp capitalism? Usurp capitalism? So before Sean and Aaron begin, I just wanted to say that I know a lot of conversations about revolution online tend to go a certain way and tend to have certain baked-in assumptions. But just in the context of my channel, and I would believe anarchist discussions in general, revolution is not seen as this singular future event. You know, it's not like, oh, well, the revolution is going to take place on May 13th, 2024, or anything like that. The whole idea is that this entire period is a period of transition, of social transformation, of social revolution. The institutions we build now, the means that we use, directly tie into the ends we're trying to achieve, directly tie into the outcome. You know, there isn't like a switch we're flipping that we go from before the revolution, after the revolution. Like, the revolution is all now, and I think it's something that'll be ongoing even long after we've made like significant victories. I think it was Eric Oren Wright who had conceived of 3 different types of transformation: ruptural, interstitial, and I think reformist or something like that. And that tends to be how I conceive of revolution. You don't necessarily put your stock in any one of those entirely, but you're sort of looking at all the different ones. So interstitial revolution is the whole idea of prefiguration, basically, where you're building counter institutions, you're building dual power, you're building the skeleton of the society trying to achieve right now. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about the difference between building the library economy now versus what a fully realized library economy will look like. Because in that transition, we might, you know, as we're developing our resources, we might have certain institutions in place, might have to go about things a certain way. But as we transition, we can drop off certain things, we can add certain things, and we can expand the system in a way that accomplishes our goals. Ruptural transformation is the whole idea of insurrection. It tends to be what people think of when they think of revolution. This whole idea of, oh, well, we're storming Bastille, you know, the whole French Revolution, Viva la Revolution kind of vibe, where, you know, people on the streets and they're fighting the police and this, that, and the other. And that's very flashy. It's very media savvy, very pop culture-y, but it's not really the bulk of the revolutionary process. In fact, it is a very small part of it, I would think. When vast majority of the work is being done in that preparatory, that dual power, that prefigurative effort. So there will be moments of rupture, but the whole idea is the only way that those ruptures, those insurrections can succeed is if they have institutions already in place to back them up, to support them. Like we kind of see with a lot of protest movements in the 2020s, they haven't all been successful. Some of them have made some gains, and most crucially, institutions have been born out of them that have enabled the work to continue to go on. You know, people lament the circumstances with Black Lives Matter and how things turned out with the 2020 protests. And, you know, despite that and despite the corruption of the organization, which, by the way, is entirely distinct from the populist grassroots movement, there were mutual aid organizations that came out of the pandemic. There were defense organizations and groups that were born out of those protests, networks that were built that we have to sustain and expand, not just like internationally and otherwise. And so to answer the point about how we go about ensuring a successful one, how do we rebuild after one, there's no like, not, I think that built-in assumption is flawed. There is no before and after. It's that we are working on it all now. And when there are moments of confrontation, the idea is that we are prepared for them. So it's not that we have to wait for capitalism to be dealt with in order to implement a library economy. It's that in order to deal with capitalism, we need to have the commons through the library economy put in place or in the process of being established. And as we overthrow capitalism, we have that safety net, we have that structure to fall back on. I hope that explanation made sense, and I'll let Sean and Aaron take it from here.
No, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think that's a really good and important point. Even when you look at historical revolutions that are characterized as sort of like rupture revolutions, the reality of it when you study it is there's no, this is the day the revolution happened. It's usually a 7, 10, 15-year process. Maybe there's 3 or 4 attempts at revolts before any of them involves a big systemic change. Like looking at the history of revolution, even the rupture revolution isn't as rupture-y as people tend to think. And I think also, yeah, you're totally right about the way that we prepare for after the revolution is by preparing before the revolution. One of the ways I've thought about this is for people, particularly, sometimes I'll think about, single mothers, people with young children. How does my political proposal affect them? Often there's kind of a very braggadocio kind of like almost masculinist internet revolutionary thing where we want to show how tough we are and how unflinching we are with our devotion to the idea of creating alternative society. I don't really feel the need to impress people with how bloodthirsty I can get. I'd rather never get bloodthirsty at all. What I'd prefer to do is actually focus and think about the parents of young children and how does a revolutionary transition affect them. I think the dual power scenario with mutual aid, by fostering the new world within the shell of the old, so you're ready for the moments where there is conflict, change, whether through environmental crisis or state repression or whatever, that there are systems in place to protect young children, the families of young children, and make sure that this is a transition that is done with minimal secondary effects, externalities. Another metaphor that comes to mind, and this is not fully developed, but I think there's something profound here. We've used the metaphor before on our show of a safe birth. The idea that revolution is like birth. It's a metaphor that Marx actually used. I found out later. But like birth can be something that has like a violent effect in a way. Like birth can be something that can be dangerous to the mother. Birth is something that can be dangerous to the infant in question. And to take birth, the safety of birth seriously, as we do in our society, we've reduced infant mortality rates all over the world by staggering amounts compared to history through focusing on this. So we shouldn't relish the idea. In order to, there is such a thing as a safe birth, and some births go off without a hitch, and there's absolutely no complications, and everything's groovy. Other times it's not so easy. Sometimes it's hard on the mother or hard on the child, and it's up to the support staff, the doctors, the doula, et cetera, to make sure that it's as safe as possible. So I think when it comes to revolution, we shouldn't lionize or build up the idea of like this inevitability of violence as if we need to participate in it, but rather we should take sort of the role of a revolutionary doula and think about how to achieve the process of, birthing a new society from the old while causing as few externalities as possible.
Yeah, another way we've thought about this or talked about this is the idea of revolutionary procrastination, which is like kind of, if there's a hyper focus on the idea of this upcoming rupture and like how do we create this rupture, how do we prepare for the inevitable conflicts and this kind of thing, how do we speed that along so that once the revolution's done, then we can start rebuilding, then we can start creating these institutions. It's kind of like putting all of that off until after an extremely traumatic event takes place. And it's like, number one, don't think we should be waiting until quote unquote after the revolution to be designing these systems, to be building these solidarity networks, to be creating these institutions that we want to use afterwards. We have to start with all of these things now so that, as you say, when the ruptures come, we'll be prepared for it. Because I don't think we have to push the rupture either. I don't think we have to like try to force it to happen. I think if we start building institutions outside of the system, and the current system continues along the path that it's continuing on, creating these environmental and social crises as it does constantly, that conflicts are likely going to be inevitable, but finding ways to meet those conflicts within the values that we have and are already putting into practice through our prefigurative work is going to be the most important thing. Because, like, yeah, people talk about prefiguration as if it's like not serious, or that you're ignoring like the hard questions, but the hard questions of like figuring out how these systems are actually going to work in practice and gaining the social skills of like practicing them, putting them into practice, gaining that experiential knowledge within your communities of how to share things, how to run commonly held systems, is going to be something that you need to do before the revolution, if you want to have any chance of doing whatever after it. Again, putting before and after in scare quotes there, because it's a longer process. But yeah, ruptures and conflicts likely will happen, but I think the focus has to be on institution building and prefigurative work.
And I'll say also they might not happen. This is kind of this might sound kind of like idealist or dewy-eyed or naively utopian, but we don't know what the future holds. And so our plan A should be everything to go just groovy. Like, how do we make it so it's a win-win scenario for everyone? That doesn't mean to be naive and not prepare for the possibility of people working against the agenda of an ecological and directly democratic society. I would assume that they will come, and they are already here in many ways. But that being said, I really think we're in unique times with the environmental and ecological crisis. I think people underestimate how much good ideas can affect the way that people think and behave, even against their own interests. There's a whole wide world of possibilities that are contingently possible in different scenarios. And I think we'd be foolish to predict too narrowly what might happen.
Yeah.
But that being said, I understand why people assume there's conflict built in here. And yeah, but it might be the case. It might literally be the case that we reach a terminal crisis in such a way where library solution is the sort of solution in wait to a problem that arises in the future, and we're able to achieve a really deep understanding of the benefits of transitioning to an alternative society, and work together to do that ends. I think this is what Ministry of the Future is about in part, that sort of process and the conflicts within it. Although admittedly, I've only read the first chapter or so, I thought it was incredible.
I haven't read it myself, but it does sound interesting. I just want to highlight real quick that we are nearing 9 p.m., at least in my time. It's 8:42 right now. So that means we're close to 2 hours in, and we're hoping to wrap it just around there. So I just want to get through a few more questions, but I also want to add to what Sean and Aaron were just saying. The whole thing is, right, and you're talking about the frustration about this hypermasculine idea of revolution, and I agree, it is frustrating in discourse to have to see that all the time. It just goes to show, like, how, propagandized we are with these, like, fictional narratives of history. The thing is, when you look at the trajectory of the world right now, even if we do nothing, things are still gonna happen. Like, a lot of my friends and stuff, they talk about retirement, they talk about, or the inaccessibility of retirement. They talk about things decades down the line, but they have the habit, despite knowing how bad things are going to be, they have the habit of still projecting the present up to now. Crap, we have like a bot in the chat. Let me just remove
Maybe
that
it's
real
just
quick.
someone who really thinks that's the best adult dating site. Maybe it's not a bot at all.
I mean, maybe. All right, taken care of, taken care of. Sorry, Tinder hot XYZ. So yeah, like I was saying, it's really frustrating about online discussions. But even if we do nothing, like things are still gonna happen. Like we still have climate collapse to contend with. We still have these institutions that, these powerful institutions that are just going to abandon the most vulnerable. So even if we sit on our hands and do nothing, I mean, we had to do something eventually. Even if you don't have any hope and you say, oh, well, a revolution's never going to come because you have this mentality, this idea that revolution is this event, and you say, oh, well, nobody's radical enough right now. We don't have enough radical people to make a revolution happen in XYZ country. Okay, but you can still put certain institutions in place, create certain organizations so that in moments of social upheaval, things go in a more, anarchic direction. I would much prefer that we have mutual aid organizations, abolitionist organizations, social ecological organizations, affinity groups, workers' councils, popular assemblies, and stuff, who are able to, fill in those gaps as, the state and stuff breaks down, as capitalism breaks down, or rather devolves into its fascistic state. I would rather that than, we present no alternatives. We have no systems in place, no networks in place, and oh well, things hit the fan, and then everybody just decides to go out and like just people suffering, people dying on the streets, people starving, people being attacked and targeted, marginalized groups being targeted for their marginalized status and used as scapegoats. Like we can't afford to sit on our hands. And even if you don't think that a revolution is possible, something approximating it is going to happen because history is not over. Change is inevitable. Capitalism as an institution, industrial capitalism as an institution, as a structure, as a system, does not have the longevity of feudalism. It does not have that kind of lifespan available to it. And also on the other side of that, when I want to talk about that whole before and after thing, this whole before and after idea of revolution in online conversation, what I wanted to add to that was that whole flip a switch thing. When people talk about, oh well, how people do XYZ in an anarchist system, in a library economy, I think there is sometimes this baked in assumption that you're just taking the people of today and plopping them in a completely different system with no transition, with no preparation, with no education, with no organization. It's just you take everybody that exists today and you transport them to an alternate reality with a completely new system, and then boom, right? But our drives, wants, and needs are determined by our circumstances. Our consciousness is determined by our circumstances. Our powers and capacities are determined by our circumstances. They talk about it in the book Prefigurative Politics, Building Tomorrow Today, I think it's called. So check that out. But the circumstances, the system we are in is what produces the people that we have today. And as we're in that transition, in that education period, in that transformation period, the attitudes and behaviors of people will adjust to that. And so I think the concerns we have now about how certain people might behave, how things will turn out, what about money, what about this and the other, as we make that switch, a lot of those questions are going to answer themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's an iterative process. It's an experimental process with trial runs, sort of like pilots and testing what works and changing in process. It's iterative, highly contingent, and through the sort of trying out these different things and trying to create these different types of spaces, we also give people access to people are trained in ways of living and relating to each other, of living together in new ways. And through that experience, we're able to then better develop and refine our course towards our ideal. So we carry our ideal, our utopian library society ideal in one hand, and then we also carry with us the principles that allow us to shape our steps step by step. But I think if we try to get too blueprinty with the vision of the future, we'll run the risk of finding out that the world and the contingent flows of history want to work in a different way than what we had planned. And so, yeah, I think we should be ready for that with our values and with experimentalism and with a sort of evolutionary social ecological approach to actualizing a library economy.
Yes, absolutely. I have 3 questions left. And I just want to get through them quick because I think they're great questions. And if we have time, though I doubt we will, we could probably. I think we have to wrap up after that, actually. But one person asked, "Do you see it easier to transition in small individual family groups or in larger community town scale? Do you see one as more successful than the other?" This one should be a pretty short question to answer. I would say that, I mean, technically speaking, families already have something of a library economy in place. A lot of things are just accessible to the entire family. You know, you share it, you use it when you need it, kind of thing. Obviously, there's some territorial inclinations between siblings. But I mean, a library economy kind of thing is fairly easy to implement on a small scale like that. But when you get to the larger scale, larger community or town scale, yes, it may become more difficult to get it started, get it ramped up. But when you do, you know, the abundance available when you have such a larger pool to draw upon is, you know, fantastic.
Yeah, I was gonna say when I was a kid, I remember, one kid might have been given the Nintendo or whatever, but we all get to use the Nintendo, and if we didn't, then the parents would say, "Share your toys with your brothers." So yeah, I just completely. Families already, to a large extent, operate under this principle. Or there's like the pass the salt metaphor. It's like when you're sitting at a table with anyone, like the salt that's sitting on the table, it's for everyone. Like these relationships are like very intuitive to people on like extremely small scales. It's like, yeah, of course, you're sitting here eating with us. Have some of the salt. It's Yeah, I just agree. I agree with what you said entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the social ecology, one of the things that I find persuasive about the overall framework of like communalism and democratic confederalism is the confederated structure. So doing things on a small scale is pretty much always easier than doing something on a large scale. Achievement depends on the size of the plan. And if we want to achieve the end of a confederated, totalized library, then starting at a smaller scale makes sense when we're dealing with the pragmatics of it, you know. And there's a variety of ways that we could do that. I think any of them are more or less valid. We want to start experimenting in that space. So yeah, it is easier to do something smaller than something bigger, but our aim should be towards the whole pie.
Someone asked a funny question in the chat. Um, is it that we are? Are you saying that we just need a daddy to tell us all to share, and then we'd have a library economy? Are you proposing the daddy state to the library economy?
A
That's a
mommy
skit
state,
idea.
if anything, but um,
Well,
I
something,
think we
something.
would all mutually tell each other to share. Ideally, it would be
Ideally,
a
indeed.
social norm that is enforced
And
through.
to some
Yeah.
degree, we become first aware of these ideas of like sharing and community as we're young by adult figures in our life. I think there's righteous ways to do that are respecting of the autonomy of the child, embedding them with the values of the society that they're going to be inheriting, especially when those are good values, which is what I think we're proposing here. So there's no one big daddy to tell everyone, but children do have trusted adult figures in their life that can help them to increase their agency and awareness of the world as they grow. So I guess the answer to the question is no, but with a little asterisk that like parents do tell children things about the world often, and that's
Yeah.
fine.
Another question. I'm thinking about trust. How do you invite and welcome more people to the commons? With new people, you would probably have to tell them the community guidelines and hope they'll abide by them. End of comment.
Yeah, I mean, in the transitionary period, especially, we want to be able to offer people something better, something that doesn't just match their ethical inclinations, which I think this does, but also matches their needs, which I think libraries, digital libraries, tool libraries, etc., do have the power to meet people's needs very well. So I think that in, in the transitionary period, giving people access to things will probably make them more aligned with our point of view. And yeah, in the future society, it's kind of wrinkling my brain to think about a partially library economy world. But yeah, you would want to make sure that people are given the tools to join in into systems and use them proportionately and fairly, and according to the principles and values of the system.
Yeah, I think inviting more people, and in terms of like making sure they're not that they're if like getting their values more in line with the library system values. I think like there's to some extent, people already know how to do this. Most people have used a real library that exists currently, and they know that you can't just tear pages out of the book or like be really damaging with it. If you're one of those people who like cracks the soft cover things all the way open, you probably some people still do that with library books, but I've heard a lot of people who do that say, I don't do that specifically with library books because I know that we want them to last longer and other people are going to use them again afterwards. And I think like, yeah, if you're taking something out of the library, there'd probably be instructions, not just on how to use it, but how to use it in ways that will cause the least wear and tear over time. And like sort of encouraging this social responsibility to like care for our items and keep them in the best possible conditions for everyone. I think people would catch on pretty quickly because I think sharing is actually pretty intuitive to most people. But definitely there's a bit of a learning curve when learning how to use and maintain any object that if whether you're buying it or taking it out of the library. So
Yep. Final question from the backlog. I mean, I've been adding to the backlog over time, but anyway, final question. What is the difference between a library economy and gift economy, and how do they work with one another? I think gift economies historically have still often do have a lot of bakes in inequality in terms of, having certain big men who use extravagant gifts and stuff to exercise their influence and their diplomatic relations and that kind of thing. Of course, that's not the only manifestation of gift economies, but I mean, I gift economies is still something I have to do a bit more research on.
yeah, same. I'm not super familiar with the mechanics of it. Like I know I've heard the idea and I've heard some people talk about it, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's elements of so from my understanding of gift economies is also not been recently refreshed. And I'll admit that usually when I talk about something in public, I'll try to refresh my memory of it before engaging with it so I can do so accurately. So from my understanding, there's a large overlap between a gift economy and a library economy, although we're proposing the library is an institution of collective freedom, and it's an institution, whereas I'm not sure if gift economies have necessarily an institution like libraries. And to talk about an institution of freedom or a form of freedom, as Bookchin would have put it, collective participation in a system which is fair, equitable, and aimed towards an end, you can achieve a type of community freedom that is bigger than the sort of petty freedom of each individual involved, while still respecting their individuality is the ideal. So I see the library economy as an institution of that's, I think, probably very much in line with gift economies, with some modifications for a highly technological and large scale world.
Yeah. Are we at 8:59? Y'all want to squeeze in like one last question?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Why not?
Right, and this is by Rhizometric Reality. They ask, what do we do about people who don't want in the library? Where do those rejected from libraries go? I think
First, you point a gun at them. Secondly, you start threatening. No, I'm just kidding.
I think I think I think the people who be most resistant to the library be the ones who have already have a lot of economic power, already have a lot of possessions and property. I think people who need it most would jump on it initially, and from there, well, I don't really have an answer. I think Sean and Iran may have something to say.
I think too, like we kind of touched on before, like you want to demonstrate the viability and usefulness of these systems to people by building them first and then using them to offer things to people. So like if you think of it as a type of mutual aid network in the current system to build smaller scale projects like this, then inviting people who need things are gonna naturally want to use a system if it's beneficial to them. If we're talking about like the richest people who maybe would even still benefit from this society because they would be living in a more ecologically safe position and they won't have to be worrying about building bunkers and like trying to find ways to survive the nuclear winter by themselves with all their wealth in a underground cave somewhere.
They'd also have access to those shows that were taken down off of HBO that everyone is complaining
that they
about.
can't access either.
Yeah, because capitalism just memory hold it for profit. So they, even the ultra rich, even Bill Gates will then be able to watch those Cartoon Network shows that were removed from streaming services. So in that sense, library society makes you richer than rich.
But yeah, I mean, likely some of the extremely wealthy people, or many of them, or most of them, won't see it that way and won't understand the benefit inherently. And I mean, those are like the potential places where conflicts might happen. But I think that for the most part, the way you bring people in is by demonstrating the usefulness of it so that they want to join.
Yeah,
Oh
and
my
there's
God,
tricky
the bot
questions.
is back. I don't know.
Oh no.
And it's not being removed for some reason. But okay.
I was saying, when it comes to transition, I think the stuff people are afraid of change, and I think even to a certain degree, I can be sympathetic to the idea of being afraid of change, especially when you're talking about a big, deep change to the way society works, to something that seems untested and unusual to them. So I think we actually have to be conscious of that when we're sort of taking steps towards an alternative society, is that people's fears or uncertainties about transitioning society fundamentally, they're valid insofar as that people are right to ask questions of us for advocating for that. And there's a few different strategies that we could take for people who don't want to embrace a transition, who don't immediately want to hop and jump in. For one example, you know, one of the stratas in our society that has benefited by the current arrangement is people who are on the older side and on the wealthier side, who basically they've prepared for their retirement their whole life under this current system, and they believe that they've earned what they have, and they own a house, and they're financially advantaged. They have a good pension, whatever combination of those things that there is. And I could see even the possibility of, like, we should have an open mind and consider many possibilities, but I could imagine a scenario where you let people who, in order to form the mass consensus of forming a new society, you could sort of like grandfather people in categories like that into keeping their way of life, keeping their current house and stuff, as a temporary measure, with the long-term plan of, after they pass on, that instead of being passed down to their children as a direct, domestic passing on of wealth and so on, it could be distributed in other ways with, through building consent with the family as a whole. I think that is a valuable maybe tool in the arsenal that is connected to the reality that revolutions take a long time. Even rupture revolutions often take 10 years or more.
I saw too in the chat, I think from the same person, potentially a follow-up question. What about people who've been deemed violent? And I think that's that's a question you could address a whole stream to, talking about police and prison abolition and what that looks like. But I would just recommend looking into writings on both of those things, because there's a lot of great ideas out there for how to handle crime, quote unquote, in society, and sort of antisocial behavior, and dealing with consequences for people in a sort of transformative justice way that aims to rebuild and take accountability seriously, without this sort of violence of the state being used as this like blanket punishment for people.
Yeah, I agree. It is a whole topic, and so I linked the Anarchy Works FAQ in the chat, because that's a lot to get into, and it's more than we have time for tonight.
I knew when we started the stream, you said we're going to try to get to every question. And having done a library socialism Q&A before, I was like, there's no way we're going to get to every question because there's going to be so many of them, and they're going to be such good questions, and answering any of them could easily take an hour if we did it right. So more questions to be answered in the future.
That's very true, indeed. Like people talking about like intertown trade, talking about like automation. I mean, yeah, you can't have phone factories everywhere. Obviously, there's still going to be transportation between communities. It's not going to be like kind of isolated thing. But the whole aim is really to try and localize or regionalize supply chains to the greatest extent possible. Just to answer that question real quick. That's all we have. Oh, you wanted to say something?
Oh, yeah, no, go ahead. You're good.
I was just going to wrap.
Yeah.
That's all we have time for tonight, everybody. I hope everyone enjoyed the stream. Please be sure to share it around with your family and friends and co-workers and random people on the streets. Share the Library Economy video around. It's linked in the description. Check out the Anarchist FAQ, of course. And check out SRSLYWRONG.com, SRSLYWRONG.com. It's linked in the description. They have over 200 podcast episodes, I believe, available for your listening pleasure. So yeah, I would like to do some live streams in the future. I tend to do one monthly for patrons. I missed September, but hoping to pick that up soon. So if you'd like to ask questions on live more regularly, then Patreon is the place to go. Anything else you guys want to plug? Oh.
Yeah, well, we've done one now, and we've got another in the works, and we know that it's not the end of it. We're doing library socialism Q&As on our podcast. We've got a 3-part trilogy that sort of outlines the original idea, and we've been following up with that with Q&As like this, with questions like this, and actually I think I'll probably be going through the questions that were asked here today, trying to find good ones, because it's so stimulating, and like we said before, doing these Q&As is a process of discovering in many cases, the answers to these questions. So if you're interested in thinking through some of this stuff more, or passing on further questions to us, we might do another stream in the future with Andrew, but we've also got that ongoing series. So I welcome you to check that out and submit questions there too. But yeah, thanks for having us on. This was really fun.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you guys here. I mean, maybe in the maybe after the degrowth video, we could potentially do a follow-up.
Yeah,
anytime.
All right. Well, Y'all have a good night.
You too.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for the questions. Sorry we didn't get to them all. We'll get to them all someday. By the 1000th episode of our podcast, we shall have covered them all.
Yes, there'll be no questions left to be asked.
It's my utopia.
All
Every
right.
question answered.
Later, guys.
See ya.
All right, and we are out. Y'all have a good night. I don't know how to set up super chats, by the way. If you'd like to join the Patreon, you can do so. But I don't think super chats are available to me at this point in time. Yeah, that's it. I'm going to end the stream now. Good night.